You are now watching Lesage, the best place to learn about competitive Pokemon TCG. Let's get it! Yo, what's poppin' peeps? Welcome back to the channel, Lesage here. Today we're going to be covering over the top 10 decks in our format. I've calculated the results this week from the Play Limitless results, and we've had a few change-ups throughout the entirety of the top 10. A lot of these decks are going to be the same because Celebrations hasn't changed the metagame too much, but there are some Celebrations cards in the mix. All the lists are available in the pinned comment below, and there's also video references for all of them, so if you're a little bit new to those decks, I recommend that you check them out. Otherwise, I'm going to give a brief description of what each deck can do, and the reason why it's kind of placed the way it is right now. If you haven't already, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and I really just appreciate everyone watching. If you need to know anything about the links, discount codes, anything, it is in the description of this video, so be sure to check that out. Maybe pick up a Lesage t-shirt or use PTCGO store promo code ZLesage5 on your next order of code cards to help out the channel. That being said, let's jump into our number 10 spot and see exactly what's going on. Jumping into our number 10 spot, and previously at number 8, we do have Shadow Rider Calyrex VMAX with Alcremie VMAX. Now, Celebrations did add Mew into this deck, and while this deck is getting a few more placements, it seems like most other decks are just kind of taking control over this deck. Another cool thing that I added into this deck for good measure is a Zacian V. So now turn 1, you can end your turn by attaching an energy instead of just passing. Because why would you want to use Cloak in the Shadows or Shadow Mist if it's not really going to do anything in the game? Zacian V is allowing you to grab an energy out of the deck, power up that Max Geist, power up that G-Max Whisk. The goal of this deck is to attach a bunch of energies to your Pokemon with Shadow Rider Calyrex, and you can either attack with Max Geist, or you can use Alcremie's G-Max Whisk as a way to kind of discharge those energies from play to do a lot of damage. Overall, this deck is like decently positioned, but it still struggles, and it kind of seems like Dragapult's been the de facto better Psychic type deck for months now, and I don't really think that's going to change things. While I think this deck could pop up and do a lot better, especially under the hand of a skilled player or a player that's been maining Shadow Rider Calyrex for a while, it is one of those things where this deck is probably just going to stay a lower top 10 deck and maybe even fizzle out once we get Fusion Strike. Obviously, I'm going to let Fusion Strike be Fusion Strike at that point and see exactly what's going on once we get to that point, but right now, I think I'm just gonna vibe out with a Shadow Rider deck. It's probably gonna stay in the bottom 3 spots. Its highest peak in the past month, I guess, would be number 8, which was last week. I don't necessarily think we're gonna get it all the way up to that point again. Could be wrong, but right now I'd recommend to stay away from this one unless you're a very experienced Shadow Rider player. Hopping into our number 9 spot and jumping all the way up from a previously number 10 spot is Turbo Zacian. Now, this is one of those decks where I'm just like, I've consistently been kind of, I don't want to say against it, but I'm not necessarily for it as a competitive player. It goes back and forth, and it has a kind of varying matchup spread in the metagame. I find this deck is incredibly basic and linear. That doesn't mean anything wrong with it. I mean, some of my biggest successes, like Blacephalon GX decks, have been very basic, big basic Pokemon. So trust me, I like decks like this, and I think this deck is a valid concept. I just think that there's much other better decks to choose in this format. Even the deck that we chose last one, Shadow Rider, that was at number 10, I think is a better deck. So the strategy of this deck, for anyone who's wondering, this deck is pretty budget if you are starting Pokemon. If you're learning Pokemon, this is probably the best deck to try to jump into. You basically just use Zacian's Intrepid Sword ability, attach energies, use Metal Saucer, use Raihan, accelerate energies, Brave Blade. If they're playing VMAX Pokemon, then you kind of wall them off with Zamazensa's Dauntless Shield. There's a bunch of cool combos that you could do with Primate Wisdom into an Intrepid Sword, or Primate Wisdom into a Rotom Phone, so cards that are utilized. Otherwise, it's a really big basic deck, and you can see by the lack of variety of cards, it's just, the deck is what it is. This feels to me like a grown-up theme deck, and that's fine. I think this deck could move up a little bit, especially as we see just kind of like players getting ready to play the game as PTCG Live comes out and Fusion Strike's coming around the corner. These cards are relatively cheap to pick up. I could see a lot of players flocking to this deck. So right now, I think it's going to stay within the bottom 3 spots again. So again, there's better decks to choose, but it's certainly not a bad deck to play with. Moving on the way to number 8 and moving up a spot from number 9, we got Sylveon VMAX. Now, Sylveon VMAX is, I don't want to say it's like making a comeback, but I think it's the type of deck that it's done well at a few events this week, so it can easily move up a spot here or there. The deck is inconsistent at its core. When you're mixing together 4 stage 1s, which is going to be Sylveon VMAX, Rapid Strike, Urshifu VMAX, Blaziken VMAX, Octillery, and you have tech cards on top of that, such as Leafeon and Crobat. As much as a lot of these cards are meant for either the Max Harmony attack as Sylveon VMAX, or just to make the deck a little bit more consistent, sometimes you're going to have the right piece at the wrong time, or the wrong piece at the right time. And it just kind of makes it a clutter of a deck. I saw this firsthand. I was the official caster for the BlackRock Gaming event that Crollo ran. It's one of those things where I saw the finals, and Vinny Fernandez is a brilliant player, and they played very well. Their deck just seemed to not want to work for them in a best 2 out of 3 setting. So I think Sylveon VMAX, while it can get those good matchups, and it does have a lot of things going for it, I love how techable this deck is. I think that it struggles with consistency issues at its core. The goal of this deck is to use Max Harmony, and that gives you extra damage based off the amount of different types of Pokemon that you have on your bench, maxing out at 220 damage, which is great at knocking out Pokemon V. There's a lot of cool techs like Rapid Strike, Urshifu VMAX that you could play, because it kind of functions as a Rapid Strike box deck, the same way that a Single Strike deck functions as a Single Strike box deck. So you could search out most of these cards, and a lot of these cards in the deck are either searchable by Octillery or based around having a different type that does something cool, such as Leafeon accelerating an energy turn 1. Again, why would you pass if you can attach an energy? Overall, I think this deck is cool. There's not really anything wrong with this deck. Maybe it's better to play... It might actually be better to play Zacian now that I think about it, because Zacian is Psychic type, but at the same time, Leafeon is a different type than Psychic, so it would eventually add weird things to your bench, and you might do less damage with Max Harmony. Keep it in mind if your deck is a little bit more spread out tech-wise. Overall, I think this deck's cool, but I'm going to say that it's going to stay in that kind of 6, 7, 8, 9 spot. It's probably not a number 10 deck, but it's definitely not a number 1 deck in my opinion. It did reach number 1 at one point, but usually when a deck wins a tournament, there's a chain reaction of players copying that deck. Sliding into number 7 and falling from number 4 is Jolteon VMAX, which is surprising to me because my Shuffle Squad team member Vaughn actually placed second at the Chill Late Night Series Invitational with Jolteon VMAX, and I think a lot of other players had some really great kind of finishes with the deck. Now, one thing, since Chill TCG is taking a break until PTCG Live comes out, and I mean, maybe it's going to be longer than that, I'm not entirely sure, but we have less large events, whereas my Late Night Series events, which you should totally check out in the description, by the way, they're every single Monday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. It's one of those things where my event is now the biggest event on Limitless on a weekly basis, and it's just one of those things where maybe players are not playing Jolteon at my events, which can definitely kind of skew with the rankings. I currently think Jolteon is probably a top 6 deck, so being at number 7 is completely normal. And maybe there's 7 decks now that are interchangeable, because I think most decks are pretty good in here. Like, I think 8 and higher, Shadow Rider and Zacian to me are definitely a number 9 and number 10 deck, I'll put it like that. Everything about there probably can be interchanged above, to a certain degree. So that's kind of where I'm at. Jolteon VMAX is using Max Thunder Rumble, and it does 100 damage, and it does 100 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon that has a damage counter. I was going back and forth about having a second Zigzagoon in this deck. I thought long and hard about it. I decided that I think it's better to have access to Zigzagoon, so you have more opportunities to do more damage with Max Thunder Rumble. Your opponent can get around this strategy by not benching extra Pokemon, or scoop up netting their Pokemon, or not evolving the Pokemon that you hit. I think Jolteon VMAX is like Dragapult VMAX, but you have less control over the damage counters that you put. There's a reason why this deck is not close to the number 1 spots, and it's because it's a loose cannon. It has great matchups across the board. when it sets up and when you're doing those extra damage. But when you do Max Thunder Rumble for 100 damage, you have to realize that there's a lot of other VMAX Pokemon that are doing more than 100 damage with their main attack. So that's kind of where I'm at. The Elemental Badge, the whole thing, the Cheryl, all these cards are amazing. So don't get me wrong, it's filled with amazing cards to the brim, but sometimes it just gets a little bit out of hand. I think this deck is probably going to stay, again, within the top 7 cards, probably like a 4, 5, 6, 7 kind of spots. So it being at 7 now, it definitely has some room to go up, as you saw that I was all the way number 4, but I don't necessarily see it being as good as a deck like Dragapult, where Dragapult can place those damage counters and there's no extra thing. If numbers have taught me anything in the way that Pokemon works, as soon as you add an extra element that you need to complete, there's extra times that you will fail at that. So keep that in mind with Max Thunder Rumble. I'm not hating on this deck. It's one of my favorite decks in the format. It's just one of those things where if you're unable to place those damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon throughout the game, you might not be able to go Max Thunder Rumble for the 100 plus 100 to do 200 damage. Damage output is incredibly important during a game. So keep that in mind while you're playing this deck. It's very important. Jumping into our number 6 spot and moving up a spot from number 7, we have Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX. Now, this deck has been kind of like all over the place, and its build has changed a lot. Sometimes you got builds with Galarian Moltres, and sometimes you got builds straight up Inteleon, and I've even seen a few players experiment with the new Mew from Celebration, and I think that build sounds really cool too. There's a lot of cool things that you could do when it comes to this deck. Now, the way that I like to look at it is Rapid Strike Urshifu VMAX is very good against Pokemon that are Sobbles and Lotads. I'm looking at our top 10 list, and I'm counting, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 decks, and of course I can't forget about Single Strike that plays all those Houndours. 7 out of the top 10 decks are vulnerable to G-Max Rapid Flow. There is no Mew from Unbroken Bonds that's allowing you to have Bench Barrier or anything else like that anymore, so you cannot block G-Max Rapid Flow. The fact that this deck can prey on these otherwise weak engines of Sobble, and they're dainty, right? Like, you could knock out Sobbles, knock out Lotads, knock out Houndour, and those decks are just gonna start to crumble a little bit. That's what makes this a very good deck. Beyond that, the damage output's low, the energy cost is also low, but it's one of those things where it works out, and this is just a straight up solid list. Maybe the version with Mew is going to be a little bit better, the Mew from Celebrations, to start using Mysterious Tail and try to get that up. I think there's going to be a few players that are going to try that out this week, but right now, again, I think this is similar to Jolteon, where there might be better choices out there. That's kind of where I'm at. I think there might be better choices out there. This deck still struggles against Dragapult. It still loses against some of the top decks in the format, regardless of how vulnerable they are to G-Max Rapid Flow. It's very good. It just might not necessarily be super well positioned. I think this is probably a middle of the tier deck, so 4, 5, 6, 7 kind of spots. Similar to Jolteon, where I think all those decks are kind of interchangeable, but otherwise it's super solid deck. If you are missing any of the cards for any of the decks that we've gone over or that we will go over, go to PTCGOstore.com, plug in code Lesage5, and save 5% off your order. Again, that discount code's in the description, so if you want to copy and paste that, or you don't remember exactly what I said, it is in the description, and all the lists are in the pinned comments below with reference videos, so learn how to play these decks as well. The goal of this deck is to really just be using either Gale Thrust, G-Max Rapid Flow, prey on those low HP basics, and just try to come up with these multi-prize card turns between Quick Shooting. You have ways to increase your damage with Passimian and Telescopic Sight, and Accelerate Energies with Raihan. A lot of cool things going on here. Otherwise, pretty complex deck to play. We made it all the way to the middle at number 5, and falling from number 2 last week, we have Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX with Suicune. Now, you might be like, yo Zach, how does deck go up or go down? And again, I do want to stress to people that I have calculated these results based off play limitless events from the past week that have 50 or more players. So if there's an event that has 10 players and a player's like, oh, Ice Rider won that event, yeah, that's awesome, but it's not relevant enough to be looking at, right? The same way that in a normal in real life season, No one wants to be looking at the local league challenge from middle of nowhere town and middle of nowhere United States. That's awesome if you win. I'm super supportive of everyone who plays Pokemon, and I think every win means something to someone. When it comes to analyzing the top decks of the metagame, it's one of those things where I use a combination of my own knowledge, my own data that I've been able to harvest from the Play Limitless websites, all the information that I've been tracking week over week. So this deck's gonna fall a little bit. Otherwise, like, I'm gonna make it change a little bit here and there, where it's just like, if I was tracking this every single week, this deck would probably be like the number 3 best deck in format. This week, it ends up being the number 5 best deck in format. You know what I'm saying? But I do want to let everyone know that the number 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 decks were all incredibly close. Actually, the number 1 deck was not really close, so the 2 through 5 were really close. But this deck falling doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that it might not have necessarily spiked as many events as it did the previous week, or maybe not too many people, as many people played it and stuff like that. It's still definitively a top 5 deck. This deck's probably closer to being a top 3 deck. But again, when there's 2 Suicune decks, Suicune Ice Rider and Suicune Ludicolo, I think players can kind of flip-flop back and forth between those decks. The goal of this deck is to choose your attacker with Melanie, accelerate those energies, whether you're choosing Ice Rider, you want to hit hard with Max Lance, or Ride of the High King. Or maybe you want to go with a 2 prize card attacker and go Blizzard Rondo with Suicune. Otherwise, you're just going with a Inteleon lineup like every other deck, and really just setting up the same way that a normal Suicune deck would set up. I think this deck can move up a little bit next week, to be honest. We'll have to see how many big events there are and how many people are playing this deck, but I think this is probably a top 5 deck definitively, and I can't ever say anything bad about it. It's really a neutral deck in my opinion, where it doesn't really have a bunch of failure matchups or anything. You might have a tough time against some matchups, but you're not necessarily taking L's like Dragapult against Single Strike. So it's definitely a really good deck to play. I don't know how expensive it is. I don't think it's like super expensive. So if you haven't picked it up already, I think it's a really good deck to pick up. And they're pieces of decks that seem to be doing well in the past. Looks like they'll do well in the future. Hopping into number 4 and moving all the way up from number 6 last week, we got Leafeon VMAX. If there's a deck that I think has been able to climb and make it through the format really well, it's going to be Leafeon VMAX. I wasn't a believer in this deck at the beginning, but looking at the matchup spread, it has pretty close matchups to everything because you're two-shotting most VMAX decks. I mean, you want to know what? Every deck has a tough matchup. Jolteon VMAX has free retreat, and Grass not focusing on retreat cost is going to make that a difficult matchup. We get it. Let's be honest. You know what I'm saying? It is one of those things, though, where looking at this deck and looking at some of the top matchups and realizing that decks like Single Strike are half weak to Grass and have large retreat costs, and Suicune Ludicolo is all about having that Cape of Toughness on that Suicune, and you got that Tool Jammer. This deck has some really good matchups against the top decks in format, and I think that's why this deck has kind of solidified itself as a top 5 deck. Could fall out of that, but I think right now, Leafeon with its results seems like a top 5 deck. The goal of this deck is to use Grass Knots for Grass Colorless. You look at your opponent's retreat cost and you're like, yo, I'm doing 60 damage per. You got Galar Mine to increase the retreat cost. You have Tool Jammer to shut off their air balloon, or anything else in particular. I think this deck is just super consistent because as Sylveon plays Leafeon V just to accelerate energies to it, Leafeon V is just in this deck because it evolves into Leafeon V Max. It's not a super expensive deck, it's not a super hard to play deck, but it's a super effective deck in the format, and I just see this deck staying within our top 5 decks. If not, it's again going to be one of those 8 and higher decks. I don't see this deck slipping into 9 or number 10. Things can get a little bit weird as PTCG Live comes out, and I might note that as we go through future iterations of this, but right now I think Leafeon VMAX, absolutely solid. Sliding into our number 3 spot and falling from number 1 the previous week, we have Single Strike Urshifu box with Umbreon VMAX. Now, this deck has fallen from number 1 because we're in a cyclical meta. It's kind of like rock, paper, scissors, right? So in some ways, Suicune Ludicolo is going to do good against this deck. Dragapult's going to do well against Suicune Ludicolo. I don't want to give anyone any surprises, but if we haven't seen those decks yet, they are probably on this list. We're not going to see something like Corviknight jump into our number 1 spot. As much as a lot of y'all want to see Corviknight or Duraludon, or if I hear one more Decidueye, y'all know what I'm saying? It's one of those things where Single Strike Urshifu, when it's at the top of the metagame, players are probably going to want to counter it to have an advantage against their opponents. It's kind of the case here. Single Strike Urshifu, the strategy here is to use Houndoom's Single Strike Roar to accelerate energies to the correct Pokemon in any situation. Look at your opponent's HP and decide if you want to go with Umbreon VMAX, which is a much more efficient attacker, or if you need to kind of go G-Max one blow to knock out their Pokemon, or maybe you need to go through something like Zamazenta. I like this deck has built-in kind of things to go through anything, such as Decidueye or Zamazenta or Duraludon with G-Max one blow. I like that you have built-in Gust. There's a reason why this is one of the top 3 decks. I think our top 3 decks are pretty definitive, where we have Dragapult decks, Suicune decks, and Single Strike decks. I think that's where our top 3 is going to lie for the foreseeable future until we get Fusion Strike. Overall, this deck's seen so much success, it's so powerful, and when it works, it's just that good. So if you haven't given it a try already, totally cards that I recommend to pick up. Hopping into our number 2 spot and going all the way up from number 5, we have Suicune Ludicolo. Now, I know a lot of peeps here are going to be like, yo, Zach, didn't you say that I think Suicune decks are top 3 decks, or that you said that, or what's going on here, Zach? This deck was number 5 last week. Well, as I said before, Ice Rider is number 5 this week, and I think players between those 2 decks can kind of flip-flop back and forth. I guess there's kind of an alternative realm where these decks can fall into the 4th, 5th spot if they kind of split them up a little bit more. I think one is definitely a top 3 deck, and I can't necessarily tell which one. I think that this deck has seen more success overall, whereas the Ice Rider deck is a little bit more neutral. So depending on how things go, I think when this deck does well, Ice Rider does well the following week, so we might see Ice Rider go up a little bit, this deck goes down a little bit. But overall, the strategy of this deck is to use Suicune's Blizzard Rondo, hit your opponent when they have a full bench and that you have a full bench. Enthusiastic Dance allows you to increase your damage output for your basic Pokemon, which means that Suicune can just do more damage with Blizzard Rondo. Suicune Ludicolo is an awesome deck overall. Being able to search things out with Drizzile and your Shady Dealings Inteleon and hitting those extra damage with Quick Shooting Inteleon. The Enthusiastic Dance is always a big turn. You're always sitting there, does my opponent have Enthusiastic Dance? Or as the Suicune player, you're like, can I find that rare candy in my deck to get out Enthusiastic Dance? It's kind of cool. The one thing that kind of bothers me about this deck is that kind of was how I was saying with Jolteon is as soon as you include more things that you need to do, combo-based decks such as this can fail out of nowhere. And it's not to say it's a bad deck. I mean, it is our number 2 this week. I just mean that the turns that you miss the rare candy Ludicolo, or that you miss a Drizzile piece, because you do have a lot of moving pieces in this deck, are really the turns that you fail. Being a master of sequencing when and when not to use Suicune's ability is going to become a big piece of how you're seeing success. Fleet-footed, as much as you're only drawing a single card, doesn't necessarily mean that that single card is not important. So, metagame placement-wise, I think this deck is going to stay within the top 5. I think it's going to switch back and forth between Ice Rider or not. It's probably definitively a top 3 deck, or at least a Suicune deck is definitively a top 3 deck. Otherwise, it's just a really good choice, and you can't really go wrong at this point by choosing this deck. Here you have it, our number 1 spot, and previously at number 3, we have Dragapult VMAX. This deck shot completely up as players seem to play less Single Strike, countered Single Strike, and I mean, Dragapult's like, cool, less of my bad matchup out in the field, let's go for it. Even the Sylveon decks seem to be cutting the Galarian Moltres, and as you can see, Rapid Strike Urshifu cut Galarian Moltres. Of course Dragapult's going to shoot up to the top. This deck had almost more than double than what any other deck in the top 5 had. It's just that good. And just being able to go attach an energy, turn to 130, 5 damage counters anywhere, having that kind of Drizzile and Inteleon engine to do search out whatever you want and extra damage counters, add that to a Path to the Peak, Marnie, Crushing Hammer, Fan of Waves combo. This deck really seems to have it all. And the Crushing Hammer, Fan of Waves counts are going to change depending on how the metagame's going to be looking at any particular point. But the more of cards that you play like that, there's a good chance that you could just really mess up your opponent's setup. Dragapult VMAX, arguably just the most successful deck that we've had in this Evolving Skies post-rotation metagame. And even though that Celebrations just came out, there's really not much that's really going to be changing out the metagame. I think Dragapult's just in a fantastic spot overall, and putting yourself in these positions where you're able to place multiple damage counters, take multiple prize cards per turn. The deck's just really simple of using Max Phantom, plus Quick Shooting, plus Disruption cards, such as Crushing Hammer, Marnie, Fan of Waves, Path to the Peak, and kind of just really having a consistent, powerful, disruptive deck. Of course, it's going to be the #1 spot. If this deck's not #1 next week, it's going to be within our top 3. Kind of again, most of the decks that we have in our metagame are kind of grouped in the top 3, the top 8, or the top 3, the top 5, the top 8, and then 9 and 10 are usually Zacian and Shadow Rider. So if you're choosing Dragapult, a Suicune deck, or Single Strike, you're in a great spot. If you think there's a great metagame call where you're picking a deck like Leafeon or the other Suicune deck, that's also great. Anything beyond that, you really want to make sure that you really know what's going on with the metagame, because otherwise you're probably playing a pet deck, or you could be playing a better deck in the formats. Again, all of the lists for these decks are in the description below. There's either a reference video from my channel or the videos that I've created for the Shuffle Squad. If you haven't checked out the Shuffle Squad's YouTube, I create content there on a weekly basis, and a lot of it is me going through my most up-to-date deck lists, gameplay videos. So even though I've covered decks like Dragapult in the past on my channel, I cover the newest decks on the Shuffle Squad channel, and there's a lot of other great content creators out there, such as Gabe Smart and Mind Blown. So if you haven't got a chance to check it out, that's what we got. We also have the Shuffle Squad TikTok as well. It's going to have some Pokemon content by Michelle Babin, so check that out. All these, like I said, lists are in the pinned comment. Description has all the discount codes if you want to pick up these cards right now for PTCGO Store. You can pick it up at PTCGOstore.com, plug-in code Lesage5. Well, that's what we got going on for this video today, peeps. Hopefully you enjoyed watching it all the way through. I know that there's always a lot of peeps that might have some questions about this. By all means, feel free to let me know in the comments below. I know I've been a little bit inactive. To let everyone just kind of update on what's going on with me, I had my PC completely crash on me. I'm recording on this PC right now. It's been difficult to stream on. So when I've been doing these kind of contracted Atlas or BlackRock Gaming or Chill TCG streams, stuff like that, my stream is always running fine. This past week it seems like I might have screwed something up myself. I'm more of a Mac person and an Apple person, so learning how to use a PC over the past year has been an eye-opening experience. I feel like I've learned so much in the past week, but that's really taken a lot of my time. So if my uploads have been a little bit weird, that's why. If my comments have been a little bit back, that's weird. It's fine. It's also one of those things where it's Michelle's birthday this month, my dad's birthday this month, Canadian Thanksgiving, and if anyone hasn't known, I am getting married by the end of the month. So it is one of those things where I'm a couple weeks away from going from Zach the content creator to Zach the husband. It's an exciting step for me in my life, and I'm beyond happy, but there's also a lot of stresses that come from it. So if I skip a video here or there, my October is completely pushing me to my limits as a person, as a content creator, as Michelle's significant other. It is one of those things where I'm just doing the best I possibly can. So if I miss a video, or if I didn't upload a video, I know I did not upload the top 8 list from the Late Night Series 10. I had a lot of plans for content last week. My computer literally put me in a massive depressive state. I'm feeling much better now, much more refreshed, and it's a new week, so just giving everyone an update on where we're at. But as always, I will push forward and I will find a solution. I have this bag of stuff that I picked at my local computer store, and I'm going to do everything myself with some aid from my really good friends who know a lot more about PCs than me. So I appreciate everyone for all the support during this time. Thank you so much for watching the channel. If you haven't already, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps. We're trying to get to 7,000 subscribers. We're so close to 6,500. Seems just like yesterday we started this channel, and we are getting closer and closer to our goals each and every day. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to make sure that I can get this edited super quick so we can get it up for everyone. It's currently 11:30 a.m. on Monday. I like to get these videos up by 12. You're probably going to be watching this at 12:30, 1 o'clock. So thank you so much, everyone. Peace out, and I'll catch up with you next time. I want to give a huge shout out to everyone who's become a channel member. It's one of those things where I appreciate every single person who watches my videos, and I mean, that's really where it counts, but for the channel members, they've gone out of their way to financially support me, and I truly appreciate that gesture. It's one of those things when I started channel memberships up on my channel, and I just didn't know if anyone was ever going to do it, so I truly appreciate everyone taking the plunge, taking a leap of trust, and investing in me as a content creator. Truly makes a difference for me each and every month. If you haven't already thought about becoming a channel member, you might want to contribute to the channel, and I do put everything back into the channel to make it the best possible place to watch for Pokemon TCG content. Again, I truly appreciate everyone. Thank you so much. Cheers. I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. It means the world to me. And my goal with this channel is to spread my love of the game and knowledge with our entire Pokemon TCG community. If you haven't already, help signal boost this video to other Pokemon TCG fans by liking it, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to the channel. Hopefully we reach our goals really soon. Check out this recommended video, and have yourself a great day. Thanks.